Eleanor Voss pressed her palm flat against the train window and told herself she was not crying. She was not. The tears were just the dust. Wyoming dust, thick and merciless, the kind that got into everything. Your lungs, your hair, your future. She had sold every decent thing she owned to buy that train ticket. She had left behind her sisters, her grief, her name as people knew it. And now, as Redemption Creek swallowed the horizon whole, a voice cut through the platform noise and split her clean open. "Are you the lady who's going to be my mama?" Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart, please hit that subscribe button and follow Eleanor all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1878 did not forgive weakness. Eleanor Voss had learned that lesson the hard way, in a Kansas City boarding house with a leaking roof and 3 younger sisters who looked to her every morning with hungry eyes. She had learned it in the silence after their father's coffin was lowered into ground that wasn't even paid for. She had learned it in the office of a Mr. Harold Finch, who wore cologne so sweet it made her stomach turn, and who had spread a single printed advertisement across his desk like it was a gift. Wanted, a respectable woman of good character, between the ages of 22 and 30, for the purpose of matrimony. Must be willing to relocate to Redemption Creek, Wyoming territory. Room, board, and honest wages provided in exchange for household duties and companionship. Contact James Thornton via general delivery. Companionship, Finch had said, tapping the word with one yellow fingernail. Means he's lonely, not dangerous. Big difference, Miss Voss. She had stared at that advertisement for a long time. Then she had signed her name. The train pulled into Redemption Creek just past noon, when the summer sun was at its worst, flat and white and indifferent, pressing down on every living thing like a hand that wanted to push you underground. Eleanor stepped onto the platform with her carpet bag in one hand and her composure held together with sheer willpower in the other. The station was smaller than she'd imagined. Everything was smaller than she'd imagined, and at the same time, more overwhelming. More dust, more space, more sky than she had ever seen in her life, pressing down from all directions. Kansas City had buildings that cut the sky into manageable pieces. Out here, the sky was the whole world. There was nowhere to hide from it. She adjusted her hat and looked for the man from the advertisement. She didn't see a man standing apart, waiting, the way she'd pictured it. She saw a crowd, ranchers and shopkeepers, and a few women in worn calico, all of them watching her with a particular brand of curiosity that small towns reserve for outsiders. And then she heard it. "Are you the lady who's going to be my mama?" Eleanor turned. The child was small, maybe 5 years old, maybe 6. With dark braids coming half undone, and a dress that had been patched so many times it was more patch than original fabric. She had enormous brown eyes, the kind of eyes that ask questions without any self-consciousness whatsoever. And she was looking up at Eleanor with an expression of such naked, unguarded hope that Eleanor's chest tightened like a fist had grabbed something inside her and squeezed. Eleanor swallowed. "Hello there, sweetheart." "Papa said you were coming on the noon train," the child said. "He said you had brown hair and a blue bag." "You got brown hair and a blue bag." She said this with the satisfied logic of someone checking items off a list. "So, you're her." "I suppose I am." Eleanor crouched down so they were eye level. Up close, she could see that one of the child's braids had a ribbon tied into it. A good ribbon, a careful ribbon, bright yellow satin that someone had tied with real effort. Someone who didn't know quite how to braid hair, but had tried very hard with that ribbon. "What's your name?" "Sarah May Thornton." The little girl stood up very straight when she said it, like the name was a thing to be proud of. "What's yours?" "Eleanor Voss." "That's a big name." "It is," Eleanor agreed. "You can call me Eleanor." "I'm going to call you Mama," Sarah May said simply. "If that's all right." Eleanor had absolutely no answer to that. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of the crowd, a few low laughs, someone saying, "Well, that's one way to do it." And she felt the heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with the Wyoming sun. "Sarah May." The voice came from behind the child, low and measured, carrying the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need volume to be heard. Eleanor stood up and turned. James Thornton was not what the advertisement had prepared her for. Nothing about the careful, formal language of respectable woman of good character and honest wages had prepared her for the way this man held himself. Like he'd been carved out of the same hard country he lived in, all sharp angles and weathered patience. A face that had seen too many difficult seasons and learned to meet them without flinching. He was tall, dark-haired, with a jaw that looked like it had been clenched for several years running. He wore a hat pushed back at an angle, and he was looking at her with dark eyes that gave away almost nothing. Almost. Because underneath the composure, Eleanor, who had grown very good at reading people in order to survive, caught the edge of something. Something that looked, just for a moment, like relief. "Miss Voss," he said. He reached up and touched the brim of his hat. "James Thornton. I apologize for Sarah May. She has a way of getting ahead of herself." "I don't mind," Eleanor said. "Papa, I told her she could call her Mama," Sarah May announced. James Thornton's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sarah May, go wait by the wagon." "But Papa—" "Wagon." Sarah May went, with the precise combination of obedience and resentment that only a very young child can produce. She didn't stomp, exactly, but her feet made their feelings known. James watched her go. Then he turned back to Eleanor, and something in his expression shifted, became more deliberate, more careful. Like he was selecting the right words from a drawer full of wrong ones. "I should have explained more clearly in the correspondence," he said. "Sarah May has been... She's been talking about this since I told her you were coming. I couldn't quite..." He stopped, pressed his lips together. "She lost her mother 2 years ago. She's been without a woman in the house since then. I want to be straightforward with you, Miss Voss. This arrangement, what I'm offering, I know it isn't conventional. But I need someone capable and steady, and Sarah May needs..." He paused. "She needs what I can't give her." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. The crowd had mostly lost interest now, drifting back to their own business in the way of small towns, already constructing the version of this story they would tell one another over supper. She could feel a few eyes still on her, assessing. "Mr. Thornton," she said, "I've come a long way." "I know." "I'm not going back." Something shifted in his face. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the easing of a particular kind of tension. "No," he said, "I didn't figure you were." The wagon ride to the Thornton Ranch took 40 minutes. Eleanor sat up front beside James, her carpet bag balanced on her knees, and Sarah May sat in the wagon bed behind them, swinging her feet and narrating everything they passed with the cheerful authority of a tour guide. "That's where Reverend Higgins tripped over a dog and fell into the horse trough last Easter," she announced. "And that's the Calloway place. Mama used to say Mrs. Calloway made the best pie in 3 counties, but I don't know because I never got any." A pause. "Are you good at pie?" "Passable," Eleanor said. "What's passable?" "It means not terrible, but not remarkable either." "Okay," Sarah May said, accepting this with equanimity. Papa burns everything. He burned water once." "That's not possible," Eleanor said. "It happened," James said flatly from beside her. Not defensive, simply matter-of-fact. Tired matter-of-fact. Eleanor had the sudden, vivid sense that this man had been enormously tired for a very long time. "I'll take care of the cooking," she said. He glanced at her sideways. "You don't have to decide everything today." "I'm not deciding. I'm just stating a fact." Another sideways glance. Briefer this time. Then his attention went back to the road, and Eleanor looked at the wide, relentless Wyoming sky. And somewhere behind her, Sarah May was explaining that the old Johnson barn was haunted, but she wasn't scared because she was very brave. The house was plain and solid. 2 stories, good timber, a porch that ran the width of the front. It had the look of something built to last, rather than built to impress. The yard needed work. The kitchen garden needed more work. But the porch steps were sound, and someone had planted something at the base of them. Roses, Eleanor realized. Old ones, established, with thick, woody canes. They were blooming in the heat, deep red, almost brown at the center. She didn't ask about the roses. The house was cool inside, compared to the white heat of the yard. James carried her carpet bag. She'd tried to take it herself, and he'd simply reached past her hand and picked it up without comment, and showed her to a room off the main hallway. Small, clean, a window that faced east. A quilt on the bed, blue and white, worn soft from years of use. This was... James stopped. Eleanor looked at the quilt. "It was my wife's," he said, very quietly. "I should have replaced it. I can replace it." "Don't," Eleanor said. He looked at her. "Don't replace it," she said. "It's a good quilt." She set her hand on the foot of the bed, just lightly, briefly. Was she a good woman? The question came out before she'd planned it. She wasn't sure it was the right question. But James Thornton looked at her with those careful, dark eyes, and something in them went very deep for just a moment. Far deeper than 2 people who had met 2 hours ago had any business going. "Yes," he said. "She was." "Then the quilt stays." He was quiet for a moment. Then he set her bag down beside the dresser, straightened up, and said with a slight roughness in his voice, "Supper's usually at 6. Sarah May will show you where everything is in the kitchen. You don't have to cook tonight if you're tired." "I'm not tired," Eleanor said. "Miss Voss." "Mr. Thornton." He almost smiled. She could see it, the faint movement at the corner of his mouth, quickly contained, like a door that had started to open and then thought better of it. He touched his hat brim again, by reflex, and left her to her new room. Eleanor sat on the edge of the quilt and looked at the eastern window, and allowed herself, for exactly 30 seconds, to feel every terrifying thing about where she was and what she had agreed to. Then she unpacked her bag. What Eleanor had not anticipated, what no amount of correspondence or practicality had prepared her for, was how fast it happened. Not the feelings for James. That would take longer. That would be more complicated, more painful, the way anything worth having tends to be. But Sarah May, that was immediate. That was like stepping into the kitchen the next morning and having the ground shift under her feet in a way she hadn't asked for and couldn't refuse. The little girl was already awake when Eleanor came downstairs just after dawn, sitting at the kitchen table with a look of intense concentration, attempting to braid her own hair in a hand mirror. She had managed to gather it more or less into 2 sections. The ribbon, the yellow satin ribbon, lay on the table beside her. "Good morning," Eleanor said. "Good morning." Sarah May didn't look up from the mirror. "I can't do the braid part. Papa tries, but he's got big hands and they get stuck." A pause.
Mama used to do it.
Eleanor stood still for a moment. Then she crossed to the table, pulled out the chair beside Sarah May, and sat down. "May I?" she said. Sarah May's shoulders went very still, just for a second. Then, "Yes, please." Eleanor's hands remembered things her mind didn't have to think about. Her sisters, all those mornings, the particular trick of keeping the tension even so it didn't pull. She worked in silence, combing through the knots first, gentle, no jerking. Sarah May sat very straight and very still, the way children sit when they're receiving something they're afraid to move in case it stops. "Your mama was the one who showed you about the yellow ribbon?" Eleanor asked after a while. "She had a yellow ribbon she wore on Sundays," Sarah May said. "I took it out of her things. Papa doesn't know." A beat. "Don't tell him." "I won't tell him." "She smelled like rosewater and flour," Sarah May said. "Do you know what rosewater smells like?" "I do. Papa says she'd have liked for me to grow up brave and kind. He says it in that order. Brave first, then kind." Another beat. "I'm practicing the brave part." Eleanor tied off the first braid with the yellow ribbon and started on the second. Outside, she could hear the sound of James already in the yard, the rhythmic crack of work, something being repaired or built, the sound of a man who started his days before the sun finished rising. "You're already brave," Eleanor said. "How do you know? You just met me." "Because brave isn't the same as unafraid. Brave is being afraid and doing it anyway." Eleanor's hands moved steady and sure. "You got on that platform yesterday with all those people watching, and you walked right up to a stranger and asked her the biggest question you probably know how to ask. That's brave, Sarah May." The little girl was quiet for a moment. Eleanor felt her breathe. "I was scared," Sarah May admitted, very softly. "I know. I could tell." "Could everyone tell?" "No," Eleanor said. "Just me. Because I was scared too, and scared people can see each other." She finished the second braid and tied it with a length of twine from her own bag. She'd deal with finding a proper ribbon later. Sarah May turned around and looked at her with those enormous brown eyes, and in them Eleanor saw something that made her own throat close. "Are you going to stay?" Sarah May asked. Plain as daylight, carrying the weight of 2 years of missing something that couldn't be replaced. Eleanor didn't answer immediately. She smoothed a strand of hair back from the little girl's forehead, the way she used to do with her youngest sister, Clara, in the mornings before school. "I'm here right now," she said. It wasn't a promise. It was the only honest thing she had. But Sarah May seemed to hear something in it that satisfied her, at least for the moment, because she nodded with great seriousness and said, "Okay." "Do you know how to make griddle cakes? Papa burns those too." "I know how to make griddle cakes." "Good," said Sarah May Thornton, and climbed down from her chair to find the flour. By the end of her first week in Redemption Creek, Eleanor understood 3 things about James Thornton. First, he was not a man who asked for help. Not because he was proud, or not only because he was proud, but because he had spent 2 years being the only one available to ask, and the habit of self-sufficiency had calcified into something that looked like distance when it was really just the shape grief takes when it has nowhere to go. Second, he watched. Quietly, without drawing attention to it, he watched. She'd catch it sometimes, across the supper table, or in the moment when she came to the doorway of wherever he was working. His eyes would move to her and then away, quickly, like a man checking something he was not yet sure he had the right to check. Third, he was trying. Not for her. She didn't think it was for her yet. But for Sarah May. In the yellow ribbon. In the attempt at braiding, even though his hands were too big and got stuck. In the way he said, "Good night, sweetheart," every evening without fail, no matter how tired he was, crouching down to Sarah May's level so she could wrap both arms around his neck. Eleanor had gone to bed each night of that first week and lain awake looking at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Wyoming darkness, and she had thought, I can do this. And also, this is going to cost me something I don't have a name for yet. The trouble started on the 8th day. It started at the general store, which Eleanor had walked into alone. James had given her money for supplies, and she'd left Sarah May with him, needing 30 minutes of her own company, and which fell quiet when she walked through the door. Not completely quiet, but the particular, pointed quiet of people who have been talking about something and have just decided, collectively, to stop. There were 4 women in the store. 3 of them were grouped near the dry goods, and the 4th was behind the counter. Mrs. Whitmore, the shopkeeper's wife. A woman with a pleasant face that Eleanor was rapidly reassessing as she read the room. Miss Voss, Mrs. Whitmore said, with great politeness. How are you settling in? Well, thank you, Eleanor said. One of the women near the dry goods, younger than the others, with sharp eyes above a wide smile, said, We were just talking about how brave it is, what you're doing. Eleanor looked at her. Were you coming all this way for a man you've never met? The woman continued. Her name was Clara Hutchins. Eleanor had learned this from Sarah May, who had opinions about Clara Hutchins. Of course, everyone in Redemption Creek has known James for years. It's just interesting, is all, for someone from the outside to come in and... Clara, said one of the older women, mildly. I'm only saying what's true. Clara's smile didn't move. James Thornton's been a widow man for 2 years. He could have married again long before now, if he'd wanted to. There were plenty of women willing. A meaningful pause. Willing and local. Eleanor set her list on the counter and looked at Mrs. Whitmore. 1 pound of coffee, please. The dark roast, if you have it. Mrs. Whitmore moved to fill the order. I'm not trying to be unkind, Clara said, behind her. I'm trying to be honest. James is a good man. Sarah May is a sweet little girl. They deserve someone who belongs here, someone who understands this place, not a city woman who's going to get out here and find out it's not what she pictured. Eleanor turned around. She kept her voice very level, because she had 3 younger sisters, and she had been in a boarding house in Kansas City with a leaking roof, and she had signed her name on a stranger's advertisement and ridden 3 days on a train, and she was not the kind of woman who could be rattled by a pretty smile with a mean edge to it. Mrs. Hutchins, she said, I appreciate your concern, truly. But I didn't come to Redemption Creek looking for anyone's approval. I came because Mr. Thornton extended an offer, and I accepted it. That's between him and me. She paused. And I'll tell you one more thing. That little girl put a yellow ribbon in her hair this morning for the first time in I don't know how long, because someone did her braids properly for the first time in 2 years. So I'm not particularly interested in your opinion about where I belong. Silence. Eleanor picked up her order from the counter, put the correct money beside the register, and walked out into the full white heat of the summer morning. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her skirts and breathed through her nose, deliberately, the way she'd learned to do when things were bad and she could not afford to fall apart. Behind her, the door to the general store remained closed. No one followed her. And standing at the end of the boardwalk, half-shadowed by the overhang, was James Thornton. He had come to find her, it seemed, or had seen enough from wherever he'd been. He was looking at her with that careful, unreadable expression, but this time it held something more. Something that looked, if she was reading it right, like recognition. Like a man who had seen something he had not expected to see, and was still working out what to do with it. I had Sarah May with the blacksmith, he said. She likes to watch him work. A pause. Are you all right? I'm fine, Eleanor said. You don't look fine. "I'm fine enough," she said. "That's usually what I am." He was quiet for a moment, then, almost to himself, "She's been doing that since Anne died. Clara Hutchins. Making sure everyone knows where her opinion sits." He looked at Eleanor directly. "I should have warned you." "You should have," Eleanor agreed. "But I managed." "Yes," he said quietly. "You did." They stood in the summer heat for a moment, the sounds of the town moving around them. A horse, someone calling from across the street, the distant laugh of a child. And Eleanor thought, this is the moment. Not a romantic moment, not yet, but the moment where two strangers become something slightly more than strangers, where the careful distance between them shifts, just barely, and something begins. She didn't name it. She picked up her basket and said, "We should get back. I told Sarah May I'd teach her a clapping game this afternoon." James fell into step beside her, and when she stumbled slightly on the uneven boardwalk, his hand came to her elbow, brief, automatic, a reflex of a man who was steady on hard ground, and then withdrew as soon as she had her footing. But it had been there, and Eleanor Voss, who had come a long way from Kansas City, with shaking hands and a signed piece of paper, tucked that fact away somewhere private, and walked back toward the Thornton wagon with her head held very straight. She was not going back. She was, she realized, already somewhere she hadn't expected to arrive. The clapping game turned out to be harder than Eleanor remembered. She'd learned it from her own mother a lifetime ago. Two hands meeting, crossing, slapping knees. A rhythm that looked simple until you tried to keep it going past the third verse. Clara, her youngest sister, had never once gotten it right without dissolving into laughter. But Sarah May Thornton sat across from her on the porch boards that afternoon with the intensity of a child who had decided this was the most important thing she would ever learn, and she did not laugh. She concentrated, her small brow furrowed. Her lips moved slightly, counting the beats. She got it on the fourth try. "Again," she said immediately. "Sarah May, we've been at this for 40 minutes. "Again!" Eleanor laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and started again from the top. And that was the moment James Thornton appeared in the doorway behind them, just standing there with a mug of something in his hand, watching. He didn't announce himself. Eleanor only knew he was there because Sarah May, mid-clap, looked past Eleanor's shoulder and grinned at him with her whole face. "Papa, watch!" They did it again, clean through to the last verse, no mistakes. When they finished, James said, "Where'd you learn that?" "My mother taught me," Eleanor said. She kept her voice even. "When I was about Sarah May's age." He looked at her for a moment over the rim of his mug. Then he said, "She would have liked you," and went back inside before Eleanor could respond. She sat with those 5 words for the rest of the afternoon. She wasn't sure what to do with them. They felt like something important, wrapped up in something ordinary, the way the most honest things usually arrived, sideways, unannounced, before you had time to prepare for them. The days had a rhythm to them now, the kind that builds without you noticing until you look up one morning and realize you've stopped bracing yourself. Eleanor cooked. She fixed things, a loose board on the back step, a drawer in the kitchen that wouldn't close right, a stretch of fence in the kitchen garden that had given up on itself entirely. She found the work steadying in a way she hadn't expected. Her hands had always needed something to do with themselves. Back in Kansas City, that had meant mending and taking in wash, and making herself useful in ways that didn't cost money she didn't have. Out here, there was more than enough to keep her occupied from the moment the sun came up. James noticed. He didn't make a production of it, but she caught it, the slight shift when he came in for supper and found something repaired that hadn't been the day before. He would look at it, look at her, and then sit down and eat without comment. But his jaw was a little less set, his shoulders sat a little lower. Sarah May was a different kind of noticing. Sarah May narrated everything. "Eleanor fixed the drawer," she informed her father that first time. "She used a plane. Do you know what a plane is?" I didn't know what a plane was. "It shaves the wood down. She showed me. I tried it, and it went crooked. But Eleanor said crooked is how you learn." "She's right," James said. "Can I learn to use a hammer?" "When you're older." "I'm old enough now. Eleanor says age isn't the same as ready." James looked across the table at Eleanor with an expression that was not quite reproach and not quite amusement, but something balanced precisely between the two. "Does she?" "I said," Eleanor clarified, helping herself to more beans, "that age and readiness don't always match up on the same schedule." "She's 5. "I'm almost 6, Sarah May said, with great dignity. "You're 5 3/4. "That's practically 6. Eleanor pressed her lips together to keep the smile down. James caught her doing it. His own mouth moved, briefly, in that way she was starting to recognize. The door opening, and then reconsidering. But this time, it didn't close all the way. Just for a second, one corner stayed up, and she felt it like something small and warm in the center of her chest. She looked at her plate, ate her beans. It was on a Tuesday, 12 days after her arrival, which she knew because she'd been quietly counting without meaning to, that Eleanor found the letters. She hadn't been looking for anything. She'd been putting away the clean linens and had gone to the wrong shelf in the hallway closet, the upper one, the one she didn't use. And there they were, a bundle of letters, tied with kitchen string, the topmost envelope addressed in a woman's handwriting, neat, slanted, careful. James. That was all, just his name. Eleanor stood there for a full minute without breathing. Then she put the linens on the correct shelf, closed the closet door, and went downstairs and scrubbed the kitchen sink until there was nothing left to scrub. She wasn't angry. She didn't have any right to be angry. She hadn't even known this man a month, but something had moved inside her when she'd seen that handwriting. Something she wasn't prepared to examine too closely, and she needed her hands busy until it settled. She was still at the sink when James came in from outside. He stopped in the doorway. "That sink's going to file a complaint," he said. "It was dirty." "It wasn't dirty this morning, and it wasn't dirty when I walked past an hour ago." Eleanor turned around. She had made a decision, in the time she'd been scrubbing, that she was not going to be a woman who kept quiet about the things that unsettled her. She had watched her mother do that her whole life, and she had watched it hollow her mother out like a gourd, and she was not going to do it. "I found letters in the closet," she said, "on the upper shelf. I wasn't looking for them. I went to the wrong shelf. They were tied with string. Anne's handwriting." The name landed in the room like a stone dropped in water. James went very still. "I didn't read them," Eleanor said. "I want you to know that. I didn't open anything. I saw them, and I thought you should know I'd seen them. Because I'd rather tell you straight than have you find out I'd found them and said nothing." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed to the table and pulled out a chair and sat down, heavily, in the way of a man whose legs have decided they're done with being noble about things. "I wrote to her when she was sick," he said. "She couldn't always talk. The sickness took her voice at the end." He said it flat and factual, the way you say things when the only alternative is to not say them at all. "So I wrote, told her about the ranch, about Sarah May's day, stupid things, what the weather was doing, whether the corn was coming up." A pause. She wrote back when she could. The last few weeks she couldn't. So I wrote to her anyway. Eleanor sat down across from him without asking permission. Those are your letters, James said. The ones I never sent. I wrote them, and then before I could send them, He stopped. His hand was flat on the table, fingers spread, pressing down like he was steadying himself through the wood. I kept them because getting rid of them felt like... I don't know what it felt like. Wrong, I guess. It doesn't sound wrong, Eleanor said. It's been 2 years. So? He looked at her. 2 years isn't a deadline, she said. People don't heal on a schedule, Mr. Thornton. They heal when they heal, or they don't, or they do it wrong and have to start over. She paused. I'm not asking you to be over it. I'm not asking you to be anything. I just didn't want there to be things in this house that we were both pretending weren't there. The silence between them was different now. Not the careful, managed silence of two strangers trying not to disturb each other. It was heavier than that, more honest. You're not what I expected, James said. What did you expect? He thought about it, seriously. The way she was starting to understand he thought about most things. Not carelessly, not quickly. Someone quieter, he said. Someone more, I don't know, accommodating. I'm accommodating when there's a reason to be. And when there isn't? Then I scrubbed the sink, Eleanor said. This time the corner of his mouth came all the way up. Not a full smile. She had the sense that a full smile from James Thornton was a thing earned and not given. But real. Something that had been behind the door for a while and had decided, finally, to stand in the doorway. I'll move the letters, he said. You don't have to. I'll move them somewhere that's mine, he said. Not arguing, just clarifying. That's all. Eleanor nodded. That seems right. He stood up and she stood up, and they were very briefly, for just a moment, closer than they'd been before. The table was small, and they were both tall people, and the kitchen was not a large room. And then they both stepped back at the same time with the careful, simultaneous awareness of two people who have suddenly noticed something they are not ready to name. Supper at 6, James said. I know, said Eleanor. She went looking for Sarah May after that and found her in the barn, which was where Sarah May went when she wanted to be alone and thought no one would notice. She was sitting in an empty stall with one of the barn cats in her lap, and she was talking to it in a low, confiding voice that stopped when she heard Eleanor's footsteps. I'm not in the way, Sarah May said quickly. Papa says I can come in the barn as long as I don't startle the horses. You're not in the way, Eleanor said. She sat down on the edge of the stall across from her. You come here a lot? A small pause. Sometimes, when I'm thinking. What are you thinking about today? Sarah May considered this with her usual seriousness. The cat in her lap turned in a circle and settled again with the self-satisfied authority of cats everywhere. I'm thinking about whether you're going to stay, she said. Eleanor's chest pulled tight. What makes you think I might not? Mrs. Hutchins told Mrs. Porter that city women always leave, Sarah May said, with the terrible, neutral precision of a child who has heard adult words in the way children hear adult words, completely, without the softening that adults apply. She said it in the yard after church on Sunday, and she didn't know I was on the other side of the gate. She said you'd be gone before the first snow, and Papa would be back to where he started, and it'd be worse this time because I'd gotten my hopes up. Eleanor looked at this child, this small, serious, brave child with her yellow ribbon and her half-undone braids, and the weight of 2 years of loss distributed across shoulders that were much too small for it. And she felt something ignite in her chest. Not quite anger, something more purposeful than anger. Sarah May, she said, look at me. The little girl looked. "Mrs. Hutchins doesn't know the first thing about me," Eleanor said. "She knew me for 5 minutes in a general store, and she decided she knew my whole story. That's not knowing someone, that's guessing, and she guessed wrong." She leaned forward. "I told your father I'm not going back. I meant it. I don't say things I don't mean." "How do I know that?" "Because I found a way to tell your father something hard today," Eleanor said. "Something that could have gone badly. I told it anyway because I don't believe in keeping quiet about the things that matter. That's how you know." Sarah May was very still. The cat stood up, stretched, and jumped out of her lap with enormous indifference. Sarah May watched it go. "She said something else," she said quietly. "Mrs. Hutchins." Eleanor waited. "She said Papa only sent for someone because he felt sorry for me." Sarah May's voice was careful and controlled, in the way children's voices get when they are trying very hard not to cry. "That it wasn't real. That he was just making do." Something went cold and then hot in Eleanor's chest in rapid succession. She breathed through it. "Do you believe that?" she asked. "I don't know," Sarah May whispered. "I don't want to." "Then I'll tell you what I know," Eleanor said. "I know your father tied a yellow satin ribbon into your braid the morning before I arrived. I know he's been doing your hair every single morning for 2 years, with hands he says are too big for it, because there was no one else to do it, and you needed it done. I know he put a good quilt on my bed that he could have taken away, and he didn't, because he wanted me to feel like this was a real home and not just a place I was stationed." She paused. "Does that sound like a man who's just making do?" Sarah May's chin was trembling. She pressed her lips together very hard. "He loves you so much it's coming off him," Eleanor said, quieter now. "Like heat off a stove. You can feel it from across the room. Whatever else is true, that's true." Sarah May broke, not loudly, not with the full noise of a child's crying. She folded forward silently, the way people cry when they've been holding too much for too long, and Eleanor was across the space between them before she'd made a conscious decision to move. She gathered Sarah May up, and the little girl pressed her face hard against Eleanor's shoulder and shook with the effort of all that quiet crying. And Eleanor held on and didn't say anything else, because some things don't need words around them. She heard the barn door. She didn't look up, but she knew from the way the air in the barn changed, the slight shift, the stillness, that James Thornton was standing in the doorway, and that he had heard enough. She couldn't see his face. She didn't need to. After a moment, his footsteps retreated. The door settled back into its frame. He didn't interrupt. He didn't explain himself. He just left them to it. And Eleanor, holding this child who needed holding, understood something she hadn't expected to understand yet. That a man who would let a woman comfort his daughter without making it about himself, without inserting his own grief or his own pride into a moment that wasn't his, was a particular kind of man. A rare kind. The kind you didn't walk away from. She brought it up at supper that night. Not all of it, but enough. "Sarah May told me what she heard at church," she said, after the plates were cleared and Sarah May had been sent upstairs with a candle and specific instructions about blowing it out before she fell asleep. James looked up from his coffee. "I'm not bringing it up to cause a problem," Eleanor said. "I'm bringing it up because Sarah May is carrying it, and she shouldn't have to." A pause. "Whatever Clara Hutchins thinks about this arrangement, that's between adults, and I can manage adults. But when it reaches Sarah May, it's a different thing." "I know it is," James said. His voice was tighter now. "I've been trying to keep that kind of talk away from her. I can't always—" He stopped, put his cup down. "I'll speak to the Hutchins family." "That might make it worse." I know that too. He sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment, which Eleanor had learned was what he did when he was running through a problem from multiple angles. She's always had something to say. About Anne being sick, about me not hiring on more help fast enough after, about how I was raising Sarah May. He paused. Some of it wasn't wrong. Most of it wasn't her business. It's definitely not her business now, Eleanor said. He looked at her straight on. No, it's not. A beat. This is your home, Miss Voss. Whatever anyone in town has to say about it. The words landed quietly and then sat there between them, solid as the table they were sitting at. This is your home. He hadn't said the house, or the ranch, or here. He had said home. With the specific weight that word carries when it's said by someone who doesn't use words carelessly. Eleanor set her hands flat on the table, took a slow breath and said, I want to talk about the arrangement. James waited. What we agreed to in the correspondence, she said. It was reasonable. It made sense. Room, board, household duties, companionship. I understood what that meant, and I came anyway. She paused. But I want to be honest with you about something, Mr. Thornton, because I think you're the kind of man who does better with honesty than with careful managing. She looked at him. I didn't come here expecting to feel anything. I came here expecting to be useful and to keep my sisters fed and to build something practical. That was the plan. He was very still. I'm not saying I'm not still committed to practical, Eleanor said. I am. I know what I signed. I'm not asking to change anything. A pause. I'm just telling you that this house and that child have gotten further under my skin in 12 days than I was prepared for. And I'd rather you know that than not know it, because you deserve to know what's actually happening in your own house. The silence stretched out. James picked up his coffee cup, held it without drinking, set it down again. Eleanor, he said. It was the first time he had used her first name. Just that. No Miss Voss, no careful formality. Just her name, in his voice, which was lower than usual and rougher. She looked at him. He seemed to be choosing his words with great care, the way a man does when he's standing at the edge of something he can't step back from. I've been alone a long time, he said. Not just since Anne. Before that even. This ranch, the work. It takes everything and gives back what it wants to give back. I'd forgotten. He stopped, tried again. I'd forgotten what it sounded like to have a house that was actually running. What it sounded like to have someone who said a hard thing out loud, rather than letting it fester. He met her eyes. I notice. I want you to know I notice. Eleanor's heart was doing something it did not have her permission to do. She kept her face steady. Good, she said. Then we understand each other. I think we're starting to, James Thornton said. Upstairs, they heard the faint creak of Sarah May's floorboards. The child not asleep, obviously, walking to her window or pacing the way she did when something was on her mind. James pushed back his chair and stood. I'll check on her. Tell her I said good night, Eleanor said. He nodded, and then, at the doorway, he paused, with his back half turned, and said, without looking at her, Thank you, for what you did in the barn today. She hasn't cried like that since the funeral. Another pause. I think she needed to. He left before she could answer. Eleanor sat alone at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low and the summer night pressing warm and dark against the windows, and she pressed one hand flat over the center of her chest and felt the steady, inconvenient, terrifying thrum of a heart that had decided something without consulting her at all. Outside, somewhere past the dark edge of the property, a coyote called, long and mournful and wild. She wasn't going anywhere. She was, in fact, only beginning to understand how deep she was already in. 3 weeks in, Eleanor stopped counting the days. Not because they'd stopped mattering, because they'd started mattering too much, and counting them felt like measuring something she was afraid to measure, like checking how deep the water was when you were already swimming. The rhythm of the Thornton Ranch had become her rhythm. She woke before the sun and had coffee ready when James came in from the early morning check of the stock. She knew how he took it. Black, no sugar, too hot for any sensible person, but he drank it that way regardless. She knew that Sarah May needed exactly 12 minutes between being called for breakfast and actually appearing at the table, and that if you rushed her past that window, she would arrive sulky and uncommunicative, and the whole morning would run sideways. She knew that the third step on the back porch creaked, and that James always skipped it out of habit, and that the kitchen windows let in the best light between 7 and 8 in the morning, and that the roses at the front steps lost their petals in the hottest part of the afternoon, but came back looking better the next day. She knew these things the way you know the inside of your own hand, without trying, without deciding to. And that was the thing that kept catching at her in the quiet moments. The fact that she hadn't decided any of it. It had just happened. The way water finds its level. The way a plant turns toward light without being asked. She was thinking about this, standing at the kitchen window with a dish towel in her hands, not drying anything in particular, when she heard the wagon coming up the road. It wasn't James's wagon. She knew the sound of his horses by now, the specific cadence. This was different. 2 horses, moving fast, the kind of fast that meant something rather than just someone. She went to the front door. The man on the wagon seat was maybe 60, well-dressed in the way that men with money in small towns are well-dressed. Not flashy, but deliberate. He had a face Eleanor didn't know but recognized anyway, the way you recognize a certain type of expression. The expression of a man who has come to say something he considers final. Beside him sat Clara Hutchins. Eleanor had exactly the time it took him to climb down from the wagon to understand that this was not a social call. "Miss Voss," the man said. He didn't touch his hat. "I'm Gerald Hutchins, Clara's father-in-law. I have some business with James Thornton." "He's out on the south pasture," Eleanor said. "I'll wait." He walked past her and onto the porch and sat down in one of the chairs with the complete lack of ceremony of a man who considers himself welcome everywhere he goes. Clara followed, giving Eleanor a look that contained both apology and satisfaction in equal measure, which was a difficult combination to pull off, and Clara managed it without apparent effort. Eleanor went back inside, walked through the kitchen, out the back door, and across the yard to find James. She didn't run. She walked fast, and she thought while she walked, and by the time she found him at the fence line, she had a reasonable picture of what she was dealing with. "Gerald Hutchins is at your house," she said. James turned around. His face did something immediate. Not fear, not quite, but the tightening of a man who has been anticipating something unpleasant for long enough that the arrival of it almost comes as a relief. "What does he want?" "He said business." "Did he bring Clara?" "Yes." James pulled his gloves off and tucked them through his belt loop in a single motion. "How long?" "Just arrived." He was already walking. Eleanor kept pace beside him, and he didn't tell her to stay back, which she took to mean she was included in whatever this was going to be. Gerald Hutchins was still on the porch. He stood when James came around the corner of the house, and the 2 men looked at each other with the long, complex look of people who have a history that predates any current dispute. "Gerald," James said. Not warm, not hostile, measured. "James." Gerald's eyes moved to Eleanor, briefly, and then back. "I prefer to speak to you privately." "Miss Voss stays," James said. Gerald's jaw moved. "It's a business matter." "Then it can be said in front of her." A pause. Clara, on the far end of the porch, was looking at the yard with great attention. Gerald Hutchins reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "I'm calling in the note," he said. "The one your father signed with my bank in 1871. I've carried it long enough out of respect for your situation, James. But I've got my own obligations to consider. I need the full amount settled. 60 days. The words landed like a physical thing. Eleanor went very still. James took the document and opened it. He read it without expression. Then he folded it back along its creases, with the careful precision of a man who needed something to do with his hands while he arranged his face. "The note isn't due until next spring," he said. "I have the right to call it early. It's in the terms." "You've never exercised that right." "I'm exercising it now." Gerald's voice was not unkind exactly. It was the voice of a man who had convinced himself that what he was doing was not personal. "I'm sorry for the timing, James, truly. But the bank has investors to answer to." "The bank has had investors to answer to for 15 years, James said. "The timing is interesting, Gerald." The two men looked at each other again. 60 days, Gerald repeated. And then he walked back to his wagon, and Clara followed without looking at either of them. And the rig turned and went back down the road in its own dust. James stood on the porch with the folded document in his hand and said nothing for a long moment. Eleanor said, carefully, "How much is the note?" "More than I have liquid." He said it flat, factual. "The summer's been good, but not that good. I have to sell stock, maybe the east parcel." A pause. "The east parcel is the best grazing land I have." "Could you get another creditor?" "Not in Redemption Creek." He turned and looked at her. And there it was, the thing she'd been watching him keep locked down for 3 weeks. Not grief this time. Fear. Real, functional fear of losing the only thing left that was his. "Gerald holds most of the paper in this county. Nobody else will touch a note he's called." Eleanor set her hand on the porch railing and thought. "Why now?" she said. "What changed?" The silence that followed was one she recognized. Not the silence of someone who didn't know, but the silence of someone deciding whether to say. "James?" He looked at her. "What changed?" she said again. "Clara Hutchins wants this ranch," he said. It came out with great tiredness. Not for herself, for her husband, Robert. Gerald's been trying to expand their holdings for years, and this parcel is the one they want most. When Anne was alive, he stopped, pressed on. When Anne was alive, Gerald kept his distance. After she died, the conversation started. Quiet at first, respectful, then less quiet. "I've been saying no for 2 years. He looked at the folded document in his hand. "I guess he decided I needed some encouragement." "And Clara coming to the store," Eleanor said. "And what she said to Sarah May at church." "It's all the same thing." His voice was level, but his knuckles around the document were white. "Run off the mail-order bride. Isolate me. Put enough pressure on the note that I sell the east parcel or the whole property rather than fight it." He looked at her directly. "I should have told you this before. I should have told you what you were walking into." "Yes," Eleanor said. "You should have." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry." She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had been fighting alone for so long, he'd forgotten to let anyone else in. She felt something in her chest that was equal parts exasperation and an aching, unreasonable tenderness. "We'll figure it out," she said. Eleanor, I said, we'll figure it out. She took the document out of his hand because his grip on it was going to crumple it into nothing. Go check on Sarah May. She's been in the barn since we heard the wagon, and she's going to have questions. He looked at her. I'm not leaving, she said. Stop waiting for me to leave. Something moved through him. She could see it. A loosening, like a fist opening that had been clenched so long it had forgotten it could. He breathed out, slow, through his nose. Go, she said. He went. That night, after Sarah May was asleep, they sat at the kitchen table with a lamp between them and the note laid flat, and Eleanor listened while James laid out the full shape of it. The numbers, the timeline, the realistic options. She listened without interrupting, which was something she was capable of when the situation required it. And when he was done, she asked 3 specific questions, and then sat quietly with the answers. My sisters, she said finally. James looked up. My youngest sister's husband is a solicitor in Kansas City. Not a wealthy man, but a careful one. She kept her eyes on the document. He knows contract law. I want to write him tonight and ask him to look at the terms, specifically the early call clause. Gerald said it's in the terms, but that doesn't mean the terms are airtight. She paused. Will you let me do that? He was quiet for a moment. You'd do that. It's my home too, she said. You told me so yourself. His throat moved. He looked down at the table, and when he looked up again, his eyes were different. The careful distance she'd been watching him maintain for 3 weeks had changed. Not gone, but shifted, like a wall that had developed a door. Yes, he said. Write the letter. Eleanor pulled paper toward her and began. They sat in the lamplight, the house quiet around them, the summer dark pressing soft at the windows. And she wrote, and he sat with his coffee, and neither of them spoke. But the silence had changed its character entirely from the silence of strangers. It was the silence of people who were inside the same problem, who had agreed, without making a ceremony of it, to be on the same side. Eleanor had not had that feeling with anyone outside her family. She had not expected to find it here. She sealed the letter and set it on the table for morning. Get some sleep, she said. You look like you haven't in a week. I've been sleeping fine. James. He looked at her. You have the face of a man who has been lying awake listing disasters, she said. I know that face, because I have worn it myself for several years running. Get some sleep. He almost laughed. It was so close. The sound was nearly there, a low, brief thing that didn't quite make it all the way out. But the shape of it was on his face, real and unguarded, and Eleanor took it like something precious and stored it somewhere she didn't let herself examine. Good night, Miss Voss, he said. Good night, Mr. Thornton. She went upstairs. She lay down on Anne's quilt and stared at the ceiling and pressed her hand flat against her sternum and told herself with great seriousness that she was not going to be foolish about this. She was not particularly convincing. The next morning, Sarah May was quiet in a way that Eleanor had learned to read. Not her usual thoughtful quiet, the tucked-in, watchful quiet of a child processing something adult that had gotten through the walls she'd tried to build around it. I heard Papa talking last night, Sarah May said at breakfast. She said it carefully, watching Eleanor's face for information. What did you hear? Enough. A pause. Are we going to lose the ranch? Eleanor set down the spoon she was holding and looked at this child straight on. She had made a policy of never lying to Sarah May. It was not always a comfortable policy. I don't know yet, she said. We're working on it. We, Sarah May repeated. Your father and me. Something crossed Sarah May's face. Quick, complex, a mixture of things that resolved into a look of determination that was so purely James Thornton that Eleanor's breath caught. "What can I do?" Sarah May asked. "You can eat your breakfast and trust that the adults are handling it," Eleanor said. Then, "And when you're done, you can help me write the direction on this letter so the post goes out right." Sarah May ate 4 bites in rapid succession, the fastest she had ever eaten breakfast, and presented herself at Eleanor's elbow with a look of great readiness. Eleanor let her write the city and state in her careful, large child's letters. Watched the small hand press down hard with the pen, making sure each letter was right. Kansas City, Missouri. "Is that good?" Sarah May asked. "That's perfect," Eleanor said. 12 days after the letter went out, the reply came back. Eleanor read it twice at the post office before she folded it and put it in her pocket and walked the rest of the way back to the ranch at a pace that was just shy of a run. James was in the yard. He saw her face before she'd said a word. "Good or bad?" he said. "Read it." He took the letter. He read it standing up, the way she had, with the same stillness. When he finished, he read it again. Then he looked up. "The early call clause requires written notice to be delivered to the debtor no less than 90 days before the call date," he said. "Not 60. According to my brother-in-law, Gerald delivered 30 days short of the legal requirement," Eleanor said. "The call is invalid. You can challenge it." James stared at the letter. "There's more," Eleanor said. "Turn it over." He turned it over, read the back. His expression changed. "He found 3 other notes in the county that Gerald called early in the same manner," Eleanor said. "All of them settled quietly, because the men involved didn't know the clause was flawed. All of them willing to provide written statements." She paused. "Daniel says if you bring this to the circuit court, Gerald won't just lose the case. He'll be looking at a bank charter review." The silence that followed was enormous. James lowered the letter. He looked at Eleanor with an expression she had never seen on him before. Not the careful composure, not the managed distance, not the grief worn flat. Something open, something that had been held down for so long, the sudden release of it was almost physical. "You did this," he said. "My brother-in-law did the legal work." "You thought of it. You wrote the letter. You—" He stopped. His voice had gone rough. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment, a gesture so unguarded it made her chest ache. "Eleanor." "Don't," she said. "I need to say it." "You don't need to say it tonight," she said. "Tonight, you just need to breathe." He breathed, slow and deliberate, like a man remembering how. Then Sarah May's voice came from the porch. "Did something happen? Why is everyone standing in the yard?" James looked over his shoulder at his daughter, who was hanging off the porch railing with her hair coming out of her braid again, and her yellow ribbon dangling from the end of it. And Eleanor watched his face do the thing she loved best, that total, uncomplicated opening that only happened when he looked at Sarah May. Like the sun coming through after a long gray stretch. "Everything's all right, sweetheart," he said. "Are you sure? Eleanor looks like she ran here." "I walked quickly," Eleanor said. "Your hair is different when you walk quickly," Sarah May said with great authority. "It does a thing." James turned back to Eleanor, and his face was still open, more open than she'd ever seen it. And he said quietly, only for her, "Stay." One word. Not the arrangement, not the contract, not room and board and household duties and companionship. Just that one word. Said the way you say something you have been carrying for a long time and have finally decided is safe to put down. Eleanor looked at him in the warm, late afternoon light, with the ranch around them and Sarah May narrating her hair from the porch, and she felt the ground under her shift in the way it had been shifting for weeks. Not frightening now, not uncertain, just the earth settling into something new. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "That's not what I—" He stopped. His jaw worked. He tried again. "I mean, after. After the legal matter is settled. After all of it. I'm asking if you'll stay." "I know what you're asking," Eleanor said. She looked at him for a long beat, letting him wait, not unkindly, because some things deserved the full weight of the moment they were living in. Then, "Yes, James, I'll stay." He breathed again, ragged and relieved, the breath of a man who has been holding something in for much too long. Behind them, Sarah May's voice. "Is someone going to tell me what's happening, or do I have to come down there?" James turned to his daughter. Eleanor turned with him. And he said, with something in his voice she had not heard before, loose and warm and real, "Come down here, then." Sarah May launched herself off the porch steps and crossed the yard at full speed and hit James at knee height with the force of a small, determined freight train. And he caught her and lifted her up in a single motion, and she wrapped both arms around his neck and looked over his shoulder at Eleanor with enormous eyes. "Does this mean you're really staying?" she asked.
"Really? Truly? Forever staying?"
Eleanor crossed the few feet between them and tucked a strand of Sarah May's hair back behind her ear, gentle, like she'd been doing it her whole life. "Yes, sweet girl," she said. "I'm really, truly staying." Sarah May buried her face in her father's neck and made a sound that was not quite words but carried everything. All of it. 2 years of missing and hoping and tying yellow ribbons into her own crooked braids because someone had to, and the particular kind of joy that only arrives after a long, specific grief. James looked at Eleanor over his daughter's head. Something passed between them, deep and quiet and too new to have a name yet. But it was there, solid and real, the way things are real when they've been built out of hard material. The summer evening settled around the three of them in the yard, and somewhere in the house, the roses at the front steps were dropping their petals in the last of the heat, the way they did every afternoon, the way they always came back the next day. The word got around Redemption Creek the way all words get around small towns. Fast, incomplete, and with enough editorial embellishment to make the original fact almost unrecognizable. What people said was that James Thornton's mail-order bride had somehow gotten Gerald Hutchins' bank charter put under review by the circuit court, and that Gerald was facing the kind of legal reckoning that comes when a man has been quietly predatory for so long he's forgotten that the rules still apply to him. What people said was that 3 other families in the county, the Mercer family, old Pete Dawson, and the widow Hartley, were going to get back land and money they'd signed away because they hadn't known the early call clause was flawed, and Gerald had counted on them not knowing. What people said, in the lower registers of conversation, was that Clara Hutchins hadn't been seen at the general store in a week, and that Gerald had been to the bank twice in 2 days with the look of a man whose foundation had developed a crack. What nobody said out loud, but what Eleanor could feel every time she walked into town, was that something had shifted. Not universally, not cleanly. Small towns don't do clean. But the quality of the attention had changed. The way people looked at her was different now. Less speculative. More measuring, in the new sense of the word. Like they were figuring out what she actually was, rather than deciding what she probably was. Mrs. Porter at the dry goods smiled at her first. That was the tell. Mrs. Porter smiled at everyone eventually, but she made you earn it, and Eleanor had earned it in under a month, which Sarah May informed her was some kind of record. Papa says Mrs. Porter didn't smile at him for 6 months when he first came back from the war, Sarah May said, walking beside Eleanor on the boardwalk, holding her hand with the comfortable grip of a child who has decided hand-holding is non-negotiable. Your papa served? He doesn't talk about it. Sarah May swung their joined hands slightly. He has a face he makes when someone brings it up. I call it his stone face, but not out loud, because he doesn't like being called stone-faced. A pause. Do you know he has 4 different kinds of quiet? I'm starting to, Eleanor said. The circuit court date was set for the 3rd week of August. Daniel, Eleanor's brother-in-law, had agreed to make the trip from Kansas City to appear in person, which had required Eleanor writing a second letter that was considerably more direct than the first about what it would mean for this family if the case didn't hold. Daniel was a careful man, but he was also a man who loved Eleanor's sister Margaret with the quiet ferocity of someone who understood what he had. And he understood that what Eleanor was asking mattered. He wrote back within a week. He was coming. James read the letter at the breakfast table, and then set it down and looked at Eleanor with an expression she'd learned to read, the one that meant he was feeling something large and had not yet decided whether to let it have words. You didn't tell me you'd asked him to come in person, he said. I didn't ask you if I could, Eleanor said. That's not... He stopped. That's a long trip.
He's family, Eleanor said.
Then, quieter, or he will be. The word settled into the room. James looked at her. Eleanor looked at her coffee. Sarah May looked at both of them with the alert, investigative expression of a child who knows something important is happening and is collecting data. Will I like him? Sarah May asked. He's very boring, Eleanor said. But in a good way. The kind of boring that means safe. I like safe, Sarah May decided. I know you do, Eleanor said. James was still looking at her. She could feel it without meeting his eyes. That careful, warm regard that he aimed at her sometimes when he thought she was occupied with something else. She had not told him she could feel it. She was not sure what she would do with herself if she did. The trouble arrived not from Gerald Hutchins this time, but from a direction Eleanor hadn't been watching. It arrived in the form of a letter with a Kansas City postmark, addressed to her in handwriting she recognized immediately. Her own name, in the careful, slanted script of her sister Clara. Not Margaret. Clara. The youngest one. The one she'd left behind. Eleanor took the letter to her room and sat on the edge of Anne's quilt and opened it. She read it once. Then she pressed it flat against her knee and looked at the eastern window for a long time. Clara was sick. Not dangerously, not yet. But the doctor had said the cough she'd had since spring was more serious than they'd told Eleanor in the last letter, and the medicine was expensive. And Margaret's husband was covering what he could, but... We don't want you to worry, Clara had written, in the handwriting of someone trying very hard to sound less frightened than she was. I know you're building something good out there, and I don't want to pull at it. I just thought you should know because you always said you wanted to know the real things. Eleanor put the letter in the drawer of the bedside table. She went downstairs. She started on supper, and she kept her hands steady and her face even, and she was fine, completely fine, right up until James walked in from outside and stopped in the kitchen doorway and said, "What happened?" She turned around. "Nothing." "Eleanor." "I'm making supper." "You're making supper the way you scrub the sink when something's wrong," he said. Hard and fast and very thorough. She set down the wooden spoon. She had told herself, when she came to this house, that she would not be a burden. That she would carry her own things, handle her own troubles, be the capable and steady person the advertisement had asked for. She had been doing a reasonable job of that. She was good at carrying things. She'd had a lot of practice.
She was very tired of carrying things alone. "My youngest sister is sick," she said.
James came fully into the kitchen. He didn't say anything yet, which was one of the things she valued most about him. The ability to be present without immediately filling the space with sound. "She has a lung cough that's been going since spring. The medicine's expensive, and they're managing, but—" Eleanor stopped, pressed her lips together. "She's 20 years old. She's the funniest person I know. She can't braid her own hair to save her life, and she laughs at herself about it every single time. And she still tries again the next day." Her voice was steady, but only just. "I left her to come here." "You left to keep her fed," James said. "I left," Eleanor said, harder. "That's the part that sits in me." "Write to her," James said. "Tonight. Whatever she needs, medicine, travel if it comes to that. You tell me and we'll handle it." Eleanor looked at him. "This is your family," he said.
Simply, like it required no explanation.
"Your family is my business now." She had kept a great many things controlled and sensible and appropriately managed since the day she had stepped off that train. She had been practical. She had been steady. She had been, in the ways that mattered, exactly the person she'd promised to be. She had not cried once. She cried now. Not loudly, not dramatically. She was not built for loud drama. But it came up through her fast and without warning, the way the things you'd been pressing down tend to surface when someone finally says, "I've got you." She turned toward the window so he wouldn't see it, and he was across the kitchen in 4 steps, and he put one hand on her shoulder, solid and warm, and she turned into it and pressed her hand over her eyes and breathed through it. He didn't say anything. He just kept his hand on her shoulder, steady as a fence post in hard ground. After a moment, she straightened up, wiped her eyes, breathed. "I'm fine," she said. "You don't have to be fine right this second," James said. "I'm aware." She looked at him. His face was close and open, and she could see the particular shadow of a man who understood loss of this specific shape, the particular terror of watching someone you love be whittled at by something you can't fight. "Write her tonight," he said again, quieter. "Tell her what she needs to tell us. We'll figure the rest." "You keep saying we," Eleanor said. "I keep meaning it," he said. She looked at him for a long beat. Then she reached up and put her hand briefly over his, the one still on her shoulder. Just briefly, just enough to acknowledge it. And then she stepped back and picked up her spoon. "Supper," she said. "Right," said James, and went to set the table. Sarah May appeared in the kitchen doorway approximately 40 seconds later, with the instinct of a child who knows something emotional has occurred and is assessing the damage. She looked at Eleanor's face. She looked at her father's back. She put these things together. "Is it bad news?" she asked. "Your Aunt Clara in Kansas City is a bit under the weather," Eleanor said. "Nothing we can't help with." "Do I have an Aunt Clara?" Sarah May said, with great interest. "You will," Eleanor said. "She'll like you. You're both ridiculous." Sarah May considered this with enormous dignity. "I'm not ridiculous." "You made up a song about the barn cat last Tuesday. It had 4 verses. He's a very complicated cat." James made a sound from the other side of the kitchen that was absolutely, definitely, a laugh that he had converted into a cough at the last possible second. Eleanor didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the pot and let the warmth of it, the warmth of the 3 of them in the kitchen with supper going and a problem that was hard but solvable, and a man who had put his hand on her shoulder and meant it, fill up some of the space the fear had made. She wrote to Clara that night. 2 pages. She told her about the ranch, She told her about Sarah May and the yellow ribbon and the clapping game. She told her, in careful words, that there was money for the medicine and that she should stop worrying about worrying Eleanor. She signed it, "Your sister, always," and put it with James's letter to the post for morning. 3 days before the circuit court date, Gerald Hutchins came back. Not with a wagon this time. Alone, on horseback, in the early morning before Sarah May was awake. Eleanor was on the porch with her coffee when he rode up, and she stood and watched him dismount without moving toward him or away. "Miss Voss?" he said. "Mr. Hutchins?" He looked older than he had the first time, not by years, by weight. The weight of a man who has been running a calculation in his head for weeks and has arrived at a number he doesn't like. "Is James in?" he said. "He's inside. Do you want me to get him?" "In a minute." He stopped at the foot of the porch steps. He turned his hat in his hands, once, twice, a gesture so human and so unlike the man she'd seen the first time that it recalibrated her opinion of him, slightly, against her preference. "I want to say something to you first." Eleanor waited. "I misjudged you," he said. "When Clara told me about the arrangement, the mail order situation, I thought you were a woman who didn't know what she was getting into. That you'd cause trouble and leave, and Sarah May would be worse off." He pressed his lips together. "I was wrong about that." "You were also trying to take the ranch," Eleanor said pleasantly. His jaw tightened. "That's between me and James." "It stopped being just between you and James when you sent Clara Hutchins to put ugly ideas into a 5-year-old's head at a church gate," Eleanor said. Her voice was level, absolutely level. "I have managed a great deal of unpleasantness in my life with good grace, Mr. Hutchins. But that particular thing I am not going to let stand without saying so." He was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said, and it sounded like it cost him. "Clara acted beyond what I've asked. I didn't intend for it to reach the child." "But you let it go on." Silence. "Yes," he said. "I did." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. She was not a woman who confused acknowledging a thing with forgiving it. Those were two different transactions, and they happened on different timelines. "I'll get James," she said. She went inside. James was already at the door. He'd heard the horse, she knew, had probably been listening from inside. He looked at her face. "He wants to talk," she said. "I gathered." James moved past her toward the porch, and she caught his arm, briefly. "He came alone," she said. "No Clara, no document." She paused. "I think he wants out before the court date." James looked at her. Then he nodded, once, and went outside. Eleanor did not follow, but she stayed near the window, not quite listening and not quite not, because she was a practical woman, and she knew the difference between privacy and information she needed to have. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. She heard the shape of it without most of the words, the low, steady exchange of two men working through something with a specific male economy of speech that leaves everything essential unsaid and somehow communicates it anyway. When James came back inside, he had the look of a man who has put down something heavy. "He's withdrawing the call," he said, "settling with Mercer and Dawson and the widow Hartley out of court." His solicitor apparently advised him that proceeding against Daniel's brief was going to be considerably worse than retreating. "And the note?" "Back on the original terms, due next spring, which I can meet." He stood in the middle of the kitchen looking at her. He also offered the East Pasture access rights in trade for not pursuing the charter review further. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That's a significant offer." "It is." His eyes were steady on her. I said I'd discuss it with my wife. The word landed in the room between them with the weight of everything they hadn't yet said formally. Everything that had been building since the train platform and the yellow ribbon and the letters in the closet, and her hand pressed over his on her shoulder. "Your wife," Eleanor said. "That was presumptuous," he said, and there was something in his voice, not quite uncertain. James Thornton was not a man built for conventional uncertainty, but something careful and honest and open in a way she'd been watching him work toward for weeks. "But I meant it. If you'll have me, have us." A pause. "Properly. Not an arrangement, not a contract." He looked at her with those dark, careful eyes that she had learned held everything he was behind them. "Eleanor, I'm asking you to marry me. Actually, marry me." She stood very still. "I know it's fast," he said. "I know we started out sideways, and I know I was slow to... I don't do things fast. I do things right, or I don't do them. And this..." He stopped, worked his jaw, tried again. "You walked into this house, and in 3 weeks you've made it something I recognize again. You've given my daughter back something I couldn't give her. You've stood up for this family in ways that I..." His voice went rough. "I'm not a man who says these things easily." "I know," Eleanor said, "but I'm saying them." "I know that too." He waited. Eleanor looked at this man, this difficult, steady, slowly opening man with his 4 kinds of quiet, and his hands that were too big for braiding hair, and his letters he'd never sent, and the war he didn't talk about, and the roses he'd planted and kept watered even after. And she felt the last careful, managed, practical wall she'd been maintaining come down. Not dramatically, not all at once, just quietly, the way things come down when they're no longer necessary. "Yes," she said. "James, yes." Something moved through his face that she had never seen before and would never entirely forget. The specific expression of a man who has been braced for the worst for long enough that the best arrives and he doesn't quite know how to receive it. Like someone who has been cold so long that warmth feels strange before it feels right. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and he took both her hands in his, the big hands that got stuck in Sarah May's hair, and he held them with a careful, encompassing grip. And Eleanor looked up at him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke at all. "Papa?" Sarah May's voice came from the staircase, cautious, hopeful, the voice of a child who has been eavesdropping and has heard enough to be almost, but not quite sure. They both turned. She was at the bottom of the stairs in her nightgown with her hair loose and her yellow ribbon somehow already in her hand, as if she'd woken with it, because maybe she had. Her eyes were enormous and moving back and forth between the two of them with the rapid calculation of a very small, very sharp person. "Are you getting married?" she said. "For real married? Not arrangement married?" James looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at James. "For real married," James said. Sarah May made a sound that was entirely beyond the capacity of words to represent. A full-body sound of pure and uncomplicated joy, and launched herself down the last 2 stairs and across the kitchen floor, and flung herself at both of them at once, with the absolute confidence of a child who knows she is going to be caught. James caught her with one arm. His other hand held Eleanor's. The 3 of them stood in the kitchen in the early morning light, tangled together, and Sarah May's arms were around both their necks, and she was saying something into James's collar that was partly words and partly just the sound of a 5-year-old who had gotten the one thing she'd wanted more than anything and could not entirely believe it was real. Eleanor pressed her forehead briefly against Sarah May's dark hair. She felt James's hand tighten around hers. Outside, the summer morning was doing what Wyoming summer mornings do, filling up with light, relentless and generous, spreading across everything without asking permission. She had come here with a carpet bag and a signature on a stranger's advertisement, and she had not expected any of this. She had expected to be useful. She had expected to be adequate. She had expected, at best, a kind of dignified arrangement that felt like something real if you didn't look too closely. She had not expected this. She had not expected to be stood in a kitchen at dawn with this man's hand in hers and this child's arms around her neck, feeling like something had finally, after a very long time, come exactly right. "Can I be the flower girl?" Sarah May said, into James's collar. "We haven't gotten to planning yet," James said. "I want to be the flower girl." Sarah May, "Papa, I have a yellow ribbon. It's perfect." Eleanor laughed. The real kind, surprised out of her, the kind she didn't see coming. She felt James's chest move against her hand, the low vibration of his own laugh, quiet and genuine and real. "You can be the flower girl," Eleanor said. Sarah May pulled back and looked at her with shining eyes. "Can I call you Mama now? For real, for real?" Eleanor looked at this child who had walked up to a stranger on a train platform and asked the biggest question she knew how to ask, who had carried 2 years of grief in a small body, and still tied yellow ribbons, and still learned clapping games, and still asked, "What can I do?" when things were hard. She reached out and tucked a strand of loose hair behind Sarah May's ear, gentle, like she'd been doing it her whole life. "Yes, sweet girl," she said. "You can call me Mama." Sarah May's face did something extraordinary. She pressed her lips together very hard, the way she did when she was trying not to cry. And then she gave up trying, and buried her face in Eleanor's neck and held on. James watched them. His hand was still in Eleanor's. His face held the look of a man who has reached the far side of a very long road and is standing in the last of the afternoon light, just breathing. He did not say anything. He didn't need to. Daniel Voss arrived on the Tuesday morning train, 12 days before the wedding. Eleanor knew him the moment he stepped onto the platform. Not because he looked like her sister Margaret, though he did. Something around the eyes. But because he moved exactly the way Margaret had described. Careful, deliberate. A man who looked where he was putting his feet before he put them there. He was also, Eleanor noted with relief, carrying a leather document case that had the look of something that contained things already settled. Sarah May had insisted on coming to the station. She was standing beside Eleanor in her best dress, with her yellow ribbon tied correctly for once, and her hands folded in front of her, in the posture of a child who has been told to behave, and is executing on that instruction with tremendous effort. "Is that him?" she whispered. "That's him." "He looks boring." "Sarah May, you said he was boring, in a good way." "I said that to you privately." Daniel reached them, set down his case, and looked at Eleanor with the expression of a man who has ridden 3 days on a train to see something he needed to see with his own eyes. He looked at her face. He looked at the way she was standing. He looked, briefly, at Sarah May. Then he opened his arms, and Eleanor walked into them, and he held on with the grip of a man conveying a message from her sister Margaret, which was, "We are glad you are all right. We are glad you found this. Do not apologize for any of it." She didn't cry. She was done crying for a while. When she pulled back, Daniel looked down at Sarah May. "You must be the famous Sarah May," he said. Sarah May stood up very straight. "I'm not famous. Eleanor's letters say otherwise." Sarah May cut her eyes sideways at Eleanor with a look of enormous suspicion. "What did you say about me?" "Only the true things," Eleanor said. "What true things?" "That you have 4 verses about a barn cat, and the yellow ribbon, and more courage than most adults I know. Sarah May processed this, decided it was acceptable, turned back to Daniel, and extended her hand with the gravity of someone conducting a formal introduction. "I'm going to be her flower girl," she announced. "I already have the ribbon." Daniel shook her hand with equal gravity. "I can see that." He looked at Eleanor over Sarah May's head with something warm in his eyes. "Margaret's going to cry when I tell her." "Tell her to save it for the wedding," Eleanor said. "She's coming. She's coming, if I have to put her on the train myself." James met Daniel that evening at supper, and Eleanor watched the two men find each other across the table with the careful, mutual assessment of people who love the same woman from different angles and are deciding what that means. It took about 20 minutes. The moment it turned was when Daniel asked James directly about the East Pasture access rights, and James answered without hedging. Full numbers, full terms, the thing he'd decided and why. And Daniel nodded with the small, precise nod of a man who has been given the information he needed. "You made a fair deal," Daniel said. "Gerald needed an exit that didn't destroy him entirely," James said. "I needed the note back on terms I could meet. That was the trade. Most men in your position would have pushed further." "Most men in my position haven't been where I've been," James said. "I know what it looks like when a man's foundation is cracking. I didn't need to be the one who finished it." Daniel looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at her plate. "He'll do," Daniel said to her, quite pleasantly, as if James were not sitting 4 feet away. "I know," Eleanor said. James looked at the ceiling briefly, which was his version of rolling his eyes, which was the most expressive Eleanor had ever seen him get in that particular direction, and Sarah May giggled into her milk. The wedding was set for the last Saturday of August. Eleanor had not planned on a large ceremony. She had planned on something simple. The reverend, a few witnesses, done before noon. She had, in this plan, severely underestimated Redemption Creek's opinion of what constituted a proper wedding for James Thornton, and also severely underestimated Mrs. Porter. Mrs. Porter arrived on Thursday morning with 2 other women Eleanor didn't know well and a covered basket, and informed Eleanor, with the pleasant authority of a woman who has organized every significant social event in a small town for 20 years, that the reception would be held in the church hall, and that arrangements had been made. "I didn't ask for arrangements," Eleanor said. "No," Mrs. Porter said, "but James Thornton has been a good neighbor to this town for 15 years, and before that his father was, and this family deserves a proper send-off into the next part." She set the basket on the kitchen table. "I brought fabric for Sarah May's dress. The child is not wearing that patched thing to her own father's wedding." Eleanor looked at the basket, then at Mrs. Porter, then at the 2 women behind her, who had the slightly anxious look of people who had followed a force of nature into a situation and were hoping for the best. "Do you know how to do a proper braid?" Eleanor asked. Mrs. Porter blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Sarah May needs someone who can do her hair the morning of the wedding. I'll be occupied. Do any of you know how to braid properly?" The woman on the left raised her hands slightly. "I have 4 daughters." "Good," Eleanor said. "Come in then. I'll put coffee on." The night before the wedding, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Not from fear this time. She had examined it carefully, the feeling keeping her awake, and it wasn't fear. It was the specific, crackling aliveness of someone standing at the edge of something real, looking down at it, knowing that the jump is right, and still feeling the height. She got up, went downstairs, put the kettle on. She was sitting at the kitchen table when she heard the step on the back porch. The 3rd step, the one that creaked, the one James always skipped. Except tonight, he didn't skip it. It creaked, deliberately, announcing him, so she wouldn't be startled. He came in and looked at her. "You're not sleeping," he said. Neither are you. He sat down across from her. The kitchen was dim, just the low lamp she'd lit when she came down, and in the soft light, he looked less guarded than usual. The careful composure he wore like a second skin, loosened by the hour and the quiet. Second thoughts? He said.
Not worried exactly, just honest.
No, she said. You? No. He looked at his hands on the table. I keep thinking about the advertisement. Eleanor waited. I wrote it 6 times, he said, before I sent it. Every version came out wrong. Too formal, too cold, too much like a livestock notice. The corner of his mouth moved. The one I finally sent was the 6th draft, and I still thought it was wrong. It wasn't wrong, Eleanor said. It was honest. That's what I responded to. I'd seen a dozen others that promised things. Yours just stated facts. I didn't know what I was asking for, he said. I thought I knew. I thought I needed someone capable and practical, who could manage the house and give Sarah May what she needed. He looked up. I didn't know I was asking for you specifically. Eleanor's chest did the thing it did. I didn't know I was coming here specifically either, she said. I thought I was making a practical decision.
Were you?
About 40% practical, she said. The rest was something I couldn't have named at the time. He smiled, fully this time. The full version she'd been working toward for 2 months. No doors, no containment, just his actual face, with the composure set aside. It changed him, made him look younger, made him look like the man underneath the years of managing and enduring and holding everything together alone. She thought she could look at that smile for a very long time. Get some sleep, he said. Sarah May is going to be up at dawn, and she's going to want your full attention. Sarah May is going to be up before dawn, Eleanor said. Yes, he agreed. She is. He stood, touched her shoulder as he passed, that same brief, warm, deliberate contact, and went back upstairs, skipping the 3rd step this time, out of habit.
Eleanor sat with her cooling tea in the quiet kitchen and the full, settled, clear-eyed certainty of someone who has found the right place and knows it. She was right about Sarah May. At 5:30 in the morning, Eleanor heard the floorboards and then the small knock at her door. And then Sarah May was in the room, holding the yellow ribbon and already talking. Mrs. Hammond is coming at 8 to do my hair. I told her it needs to be a real braid, not just pulled back, because this is a wedding. Is 8 too late? It feels late. Papa is already outside. He's been outside since before I woke up. I look out the window. He was just standing in the yard. A pause. Is that normal? For your father, yes, Eleanor said. What is he doing? Thinking, probably. He does that outside sometimes. He should be getting dressed. He has time. Come here. Eleanor patted the bed beside her, and Sarah May climbed up and settled with the particular comfortable weight of a child who has decided a lap is available and is using it. Eleanor took the yellow ribbon from her and began combing through her hair with her fingers, slowly, working out the sleep tangles. Are you nervous? About what? Today. Sarah May thought about it. No, I've been waiting for today. She was quiet for a moment, leaning back into Eleanor's hands. Eleanor, when you're married to Papa, does that mean you're my real mama? Like, legally? The word legally in a 5-year-old's mouth was so precisely, painfully earnest that Eleanor had to take a breath before she answered. There are papers we can file, Eleanor said carefully, that make it legal, if you want that. I want that, Sarah May said immediately, zero hesitation. I'll talk to Daniel before he goes back, Eleanor said. He'll know how to do it right. Sarah May went still in that way she had,
That particular stillness of someone receiving something they'd been afraid to ask for.
Then she turned around and looked at Eleanor with her face wide open. No guard, no careful management, just Sarah May all the way down. "I kept the yellow ribbon," she said, "from Mama's things. I was scared Papa would think it was wrong of me." "He wouldn't think that," Eleanor said. "I know that now. I didn't then." She pressed the ribbon between her fingers. "Do you think she'd be mad that I want to call you Mama?" Eleanor took the ribbon from her gently and held it. "I think," she said, "that a woman who planted roses and taught her husband to tie ribbons because her little girl needed them, that woman would want her little girl taken care of. That's all she'd want. Not credit, not memory. Just you taken care of." Sarah May's eyes were bright. "How do you know?" "Because that's what mothers want," Eleanor said. "All of them. Every one." Sarah May looked at her for a long moment. Then she turned back around and said, in a voice that was working very hard to be normal, "Can you do the braid now? I want to practice it before Mrs. Hammond comes." "Yes," said Eleanor, and started braiding. Look, the ceremony was at 11 o'clock. Eleanor had not expected the church to be full. It was full. Nearly every family in Redemption Creek, it seemed, had decided that this was a thing worth witnessing. Some out of genuine warmth, some out of the small-town compulsion to be present at significant events. And a few, Eleanor suspected, simply because they had been watching this particular story unfold and wanted to see how it ended. Daniel sat in the front pew beside an empty space that should have been Margaret and wasn't, which he had accepted with the stoic grace of a man who had tried. The Mercer family was there. Old Pete Dawson, the widow Hartley, 3 families who had gotten their land back and had apparently decided that warranted a personal appearance. Clara Hutchins was not there. Gerald Hutchins was. He sat near the back, alone, with his hat in his hands, and when Eleanor came down the aisle on Daniel's arm, she looked at him briefly, and he gave a small, precise nod and looked at his hat. She nodded back and looked forward. She did not forgive him that day, but she noted the nod and filed it somewhere reasonable and moved on. Then she looked at James. He was standing at the front of the church in a good dark suit she had not seen before. He must have had it made recently, she realized, and the thought of him going to the trouble of that, quietly, without mentioning it, and he was looking at her with the full, unguarded expression she'd earned from him over 2 months of hard, honest living. Not the careful composure, not the managed distance, just James Thornton looking at Eleanor Voss walking toward him, with everything he felt laid out plain in his face for anyone to read. Sarah May stood to the side in her new dress, with her hair in a proper braid and the yellow ribbon tied at the end, holding a small bunch of wildflowers she had picked herself that morning with great selectivity, and she was vibrating with the contained joy of someone doing their absolute level best not to run. Eleanor stopped beside James. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Nice suit," she said, quietly, only for him. Something moved through his face. "You look—" He stopped. His voice had gone rough. "Eleanor, you looked like exactly who you are." It was not the most conventional compliment. She would not have traded it for anything. The Reverend was brief, because Eleanor had specifically requested brief, and the words went by the way words do in moments that are too large for words to fully carry. She heard them. She meant them. She felt them land in the specific way that real things land when you say them in front of people you respect. When it was done, James looked at her for one long, still moment, and then he bent and kissed her with the careful, deliberate tenderness of a man who is not doing things for show. Just for her. Just this. Behind them, Sarah May made the sound she had made in the kitchen the morning James proposed.
that full body, wordless sound of pure and total joy. The church laughed, all of it at once, warm and genuine. James pulled back and looked at Eleanor with a slightly helpless expression that meant the laugh had gotten to him, too. And Eleanor was already laughing herself, and she reached out and took his hand and turned to face their daughter. Sarah May threw the wildflowers straight up in the air. They scattered everywhere. She did not appear to consider this a problem. "I'm the flower girl," she announced to the entire church at full volume with absolute conviction. Later, much later, after the reception and the food and Mrs. Porter's organizational triumph and Daniel's 3 toasts, which were too long but earned, Eleanor stood on the front porch in the late evening with the last of the summer heat pressing soft and warm around her. She heard the door. James came out and stood beside her. They were quiet for a while. Inside, she could hear Daniel's low voice still talking to someone. The man could talk, she'd give him that. And the occasional sound of people finishing up the last of the evening. Sarah May had fallen asleep on the church hall bench approximately an hour ago, and James had carried her home before the last guests left. And she was upstairs now in her room, with her flower girl dress folded on the chair and her yellow ribbon on the nightstand, and her face in perfect, unconscious peace. Eleanor had checked on her on the way out. She didn't try to explain why, even to herself. She had just needed to see her. "She didn't let go of the ribbon all day," James said. "I know. Even when she threw the flowers," he paused. "She was holding it in her other hand." Eleanor smiled in the dark. "She's resourceful. She gets that from somewhere," James said. She looked at him sideways. "Don't be charming." "I'm not charming. You're being charming right now." "That's just my face." Eleanor laughed, and he caught the sound of it the way she'd caught his that night in the kitchen. Stored it, she could tell, in the same private place where she kept the things that mattered. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into it, into the solid, warm fact of him. And they stood like that in the late summer dark, with the last of the heat and the full, enormous Wyoming sky above them, doing what it always did, filling everything up with stars, relentless and generous, not asking permission. "I want to bring my sisters here," Eleanor said. "Clara, when she's well enough. Margaret, if Daniel will let her travel. I want them to see this." "Bring them," James said. "There's room." "You haven't met Margaret." "Does she need special management?" "She needs to be told she's right about things occasionally, even when she isn't, or she gets loud about it." "I can do that." "You say that now." "Eleanor." He said her name the way he'd said it that first night in the kitchen, rough and quiet and specific. The name of a particular woman, and not just any. "Bring your family." She pressed her hand flat against his chest, over his heart, and felt it beating, steady and real, the way this man was steady and real, the way this place had become steady and real, without her planning for it at all. "I have something to tell you," she said. He waited. "When I was on the train," she said, "coming out here, I had the advertisement in my pocket, and I kept taking it out and reading it, because I was trying to find the part where I'd made a mistake, the part that would explain why this was a terrible idea." She paused. "I never found it." He was quiet. "I was still terrified," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I was absolutely terrified." "I know," he said. "I could tell the moment you stepped off the train." She looked up at him. "Could everyone tell?" "No," he said. "Just me. Because I was terrified too, and terrified people can see each other," she finished. He looked at her. A beat of silence that held every conversation they'd had, and every one they hadn't, and everything that had been built between them out of hard material and honest words. "Yes," he said, quietly. Exactly that. She turned back to the sky. His arm tightened slightly on her shoulders, and she felt the full weight of what had happened to her life settle in. Not heavy, not frightening, but complete. The way a thing feels when the last piece finds its place. Inside the house, a floorboard creaked. Then another. Then small feet on the stairs. Not trying to be quiet, not sneaking, just moving with the unhurried certainty of a child navigating her own home in the dark. The front door opened. Sarah May appeared in her nightgown, hair loose, yellow ribbon still somehow in her hand. She looked at them both with the bleary, unguarded face of someone recently and not entirely awake. "I woke up," she said. "We noticed," James said. "I wanted to make sure you were both still here." Eleanor reached out and took Sarah May's free hand and drew her in between them. And the little girl leaned her whole weight against Eleanor's side with the absolute, boneless trust of a child who has decided once and for all that this is where she belongs. "We're here," Eleanor said. "Both of you?" "Both of us," James said. "Always." Sarah May was quiet for a moment. Then, with the philosophical satisfaction of someone who has confirmed an important fact, "Good." She didn't go back inside. She just stood between them and looked at the sky, the yellow ribbon loose in her fingers, and Eleanor kept her hand, and James kept his arm around Eleanor's shoulders, and the three of them stood on the porch of their house in the last of the summer dark. The stars did not care who was watching them. They simply burned, steady and enormous, the way they always had and always would. And Eleanor Voss, who had come west with a signed piece of paper and a carpet bag, and her hand shaking and her chin up, stood in the middle of the life she had built out of courage and plain honesty. And she knew, without doubt, without qualification, without the need for any more counting or measuring or bracing, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had always been going to end up here. She just hadn't known it yet when she started.